Welcome to today's media literacy lesson. This will be the first on what will be a several part series on understanding media and becoming what we consider media literate. Now, one of the things you need to remember is when we say literate, we're not talking about your ability to read. We are talking about your ability to comprehend what we're attempting to talk about and understand that information itself. So to take in the information and then look at that information and be able to make decisions when it comes to that information. And we'll begin with just kind of the overall concept of what media literacy is. The first thing you need to note is that this might be one of the most important things you will take in over the next part of your life. Essentially, you take in media every single day on this planet. You have a cell phone. On your cell phone, you are taking in even text messages from friends could be considered media. If you are on any type of social media, that is media as well. If you watch television, you watch Netflix, all of those things, media literacy. So these are forms of media that you are taking in throughout the day. And these pieces of media actually change the way you perceive things. Things are completely different than you might think. It's not that every single piece of media is out there actively attempting to change your perspective, but your perspective does change due to the types of media you take in. And that's what we want to make sure you're aware of. The first thing when it comes to media literacy is to recognize that media itself is a construction. It's created by someone. So anytime you take in any form of media, you want to be sure you understand who is putting it together and what their motivations might be. So that's the very first thing you do, whether it's just a social media post from a friend or if it is a movie you're watching on Netflix, or if it is a story you're reading on a website, the first thing you need to do is figure out who put it together and why did they put it together, right? What are their motivations? Why do they want you to take in this information? That's extraordinarily important, is knowing who puts it together and why they put it together and what is their intended message. So that's the first thing that you want to think about. The second thing you want to think about when it comes to media literacy is that it is you, the audience, who decides what something ultimately means. The artist, yes, has a reason, a purpose for putting something together. But ultimately, it is you, the audience, the person consuming, that's going to decide what this means. If the entire population believes that one thing means something different than what the artist intended it to mean, it still means what you think it does, not what the artist thought it did. And that's something that sometimes is tough to comprehend because that gets into these concepts and these questions about who really owns art. But this isn't about ownership. This is simply about meaning. And if the entire audience believes one thing, then that actually is what it means, whether or not that's what the artist intended. Now, when you are in English class, one of the things you look at is what the artist means or what the writer intends you to take from that. And that is important to be able to understand, is what the artist intends. But for all intents and purposes, if the entire audience believes one thing, that really is what it means. That's how it's going to go down in history. That's how we will remember it. So that second part of media literacy is understanding what everyone else thinks about media. What do they believe it means? Because that is actually the real meaning of media. The third thing you want to think about are the commercial implications. Just about every piece of media has a commercial purpose behind it. It's not just there for no purpose, right? It's there to make money or promote something, but there is a commercial value to almost any form of media. Even the person simply posting an Instagram post has some type of reasoning behind it, or at the very least, it exists on a platform in which it's making money for the platform itself, which would be a form of a commercial purpose. So For the most part, just about any media you take in has a commercial purpose, and that purpose is going to affect the message that it relays to you. If it is essentially trying to entertain you, it's probably not as concerned about factual information because that's not its goal. Its goal is to entertain, right? And it's entertaining so that you will purchase it and they can make money. And that's that commercial implication. It's something you always have to think about. When you're consuming content, you have to think about why is this existing? How am I taking this in? What is the commercial purpose behind this? Now, some media, not all media, but some media has social and political meaning behind it, right? There are social messages. Think about political ads, right? They're there to tell you to vote for one candidate or to attack another candidate. There are social messages. There are people that are pushing for their social perspectives and views. So a lot of media does have this other implication where they're trying to convince you of a specific viewpoint. We often see this in journalistic outlets as far as opinion columns and editorials, where they're promoting or trying to convince you to see things the way they see things. And that is a real thing you have to take into account. If I'm reading an editorial, I'm reading a column, know that that's an opinion piece. That's not there just to inform you. That's there to try to persuade you a little bit, right? One of the main things we talked about in journalism was that to persuade is actually a function of some forms of journalism, such as editorials and columns. Social and political implications often fall in there, but also in political ads. When you watch a political ad, see who pays for it. Look that up, and that will tell you kind of why that message is who it is or is how it is, right? If it's a message from the president telling you not to vote for the person running against him, then you know that that's why there's a slant there. That is the political implication behind that form of media. The final kind of construct here is that each medium itself is different, meaning that just the way you're consuming it is going to change the message itself, right? You're not going to post the same thing on Twitter that you would post on Instagram, that you would post on Facebook. Those are different social media platforms that require you to communicate a little differently. Just like listening to a podcast is not going to be the exact same as reading an article or watching a broadcast or watching a YouTube video. The medium itself makes a difference. Depending on that medium, the message could change. They could be in a different type of genre. And there's genre tropes you want to think about, right? Is this meant to fulfill a certain need? Are you watching a horror movie and maybe it's not something they're creating to reinforce stereotypes? Stereotypes are part of the genre. So they're just trying to follow genre conventions. And so that's something you have to take into account. When you consume the media, what medium is it in? And if you follow along that path, that will give you another way to kind of take in that media. So, overall, what you really need to think about is the media itself. When you look at all four of those things we talked about, every time you take in media, you need to ask yourself some questions. You need to ask yourself, why is this being created? What do I believe it means? What do other people believe it means? Are there some social or political messages in here? And finally, what platform am I taking this in on? Is that changing the way I see it? Have they edited the video differently? Have they photoshopped the images I'm looking at? Is that changing what I'm getting in? So a lot of media literacy actually falls on you, the consumer, to be able to look at that media and think about what it actually means. So for today's lesson, I think I want to talk a little bit about why this is important. I could have you look at a piece of media and then answer all the questions that are on the slides that are attached to kind of this lecture. And you can do that. That would definitely be something that would be good for you to do. In fact, I encourage you to take a piece of media and look at it and then answer all those questions. I think that's vital. But what I really want to do is show you the importance of media literacy. So I have linked a story, and in that story, you're going to see how this event happened. And because people rush to judgment, There were reactions that maybe they shouldn't have had if they had simply waited to get their full information. And because of that, it changed the way that story has been perceived and the way we perceive that story even to today. So I would like you to follow that link that is on the attached Google Slide, read the story, and then answer some of those questions after you've read through that link. That should hopefully help you understand why we're tackling this and why media literacy is so important. Our next lesson, we're going to move on to disinformation, which is actually the biggest part of media literacy in this current class.